But behind the sealed doors of the imperial palace, a far darker transformation was unfolding. Caligula had discovered something profound during his near-death experience. The intoxicating truth that as emperor, he could do anything to anyone, and no one could ever stop him. The palace staff were the first to witness this descent. Servants who had long served the imperial family suddenly found themselves at the mercy of the emperor's erratic whims and depraved desires. Young male slaves were especially vulnerable. Caligula would summon them to his chambers and compel them to perform acts that violated every concept of Roman honor. Yet it was the female servants who endured the greatest torment. Ancient accounts, cloaked in cautious language, describe how the emperor prowled the palace halls at night, selecting women at random to satisfy his lusts. These were not encounters of consent. They were acts of domination, cruel performances of his absolute authority over all who lived within his reach. His appetite soon extended beyond servants. Caligula began inviting the wives of senators and high-ranking officials to private meetings under the guise of discussing political or family matters. These women, raised under the rigid moral codes of Roman aristocracy, found themselves in impossible situations, where refusing the emperor's advances meant certain death for themselves and their kin. One chilling account tells of Caligula ordering these women to strip bare and perform humiliating acts while he observed from his throne, sometimes bringing multiple women together to compete for his amusement. The psychological torment was as deliberate as the physical degradation. Proud Roman matrons who had once commanded dignity throughout the empire were reduced to objects of humiliation for the emperor's pleasure. What made Caligula's corruption of the palace truly horrifying was not merely the sexual violence. It was his calculated use of sex as a weapon to annihilate Rome's social hierarchy. He realized that by forcing the empire's most honored citizens to partake in or witness acts of debasement, he could crush their spirits more completely than through any physical torture. The emperor began hosting lavish feasts that opened with refined civility, but inevitably descended into chaos. Senators and their families attended, believing themselves part of elite society, only to watch the evenings collapse into orgies of submission and fear. As the night wore on, Caligula's commands became grotesquely personal. "Senator Marcus," he might declare, his tone as casual as if he were asking for another cup of wine. "Your wife has such lovely eyes. I wonder how they look when she kneels before me." The senator, paralyzed by terror, could do nothing. Any word of protest meant death, for himself, his wife, and his children. Meanwhile, his wife, stripped of all dignity, would be forced to obey every command while her family watched in unbearable horror. The psychological destruction inflicted on these families was often beyond repair. Marriages shattered, children scarred for life, and once proud Roman bloodlines reduced to tools for the emperor's depraved satisfaction. Caligula took particular pleasure in forcing senators to witness their wives' humiliation. He arranged special seating so that husbands could clearly see their wives performing oral sex or intercourse with him or chosen partners. The men's faces, filled with rage, despair, and shame, seemed to excite Caligula as much as the acts themselves. The imperial palace complex atop the Palatine Hill underwent deliberate reconstruction to support Caligula's increasingly elaborate desires. He commissioned special chambers built solely for orgies, equipped with circular couches for full visibility from every direction. Archaeological fragments reveal spaces where ordinary furniture was replaced by staging areas for group acts. One chamber, described by ancient writers, resembled a miniature amphitheater with tiered seating around a central arena where Caligula orchestrated live sexual performances. He forced captive slaves and even Roman citizens to engage in acts of degradation, while senators and their families were made to watch and applaud. The emperor's private bedroom became an infamous source of terror. Unlike his predecessors, Caligula's quarters included observation galleries and multiple entrances, so he could summon spectators to witness his encounters. He seemed to take equal pleasure in being observed as in the act itself, turning sex into a public display of his supreme authority. Caligula even founded what can only be described as a palace brothel, staffed by the wives and daughters of disgraced senators. These women were forced to serve not just the emperor, but also guests, diplomats, and soldiers, all for the emperor's amusement. Caligula often directed these scenes himself, offering instructions and commentary as if directing a play. Most shocking of all was how he merged sexual degradation with the sacred rituals of Rome's religion and government. Ceremonies once performed with solemnity became platforms for humiliation. During Senate sessions, he sometimes ordered senators' wives to perform sexual acts while political discussions continued. The business of governance fused with obscene display, and the empire's most powerful men made decisions while their families were violated before them. Religious practices suffered the same corruption. Declaring himself a living god, Caligula demanded that rituals include sexual offerings in his honor. Priestesses sworn to chastity were compelled to commit public acts of intercourse during festivals. Once holy celebrations devolved into forced orgies involving the noble class. His marriages, too, became infamous spectacles. Caligula wed and discarded wives in rapid succession, using each union to disgrace the bride's family. One account tells how he made a bride's father watch him consummate the marriage before all the guests, transforming the sacred bond into an exhibition of power. But Caligula's lust was never just personal. It became a weapon of economic control. He targeted the wealthiest families, demanding sexual access to their wives and daughters in exchange for their safety and fortunes. This created a monstrous economy where noblemen offered their women as currency for survival or political favor. Families received invitations for their women to attend the emperor privately, knowing full well what awaited them but powerless to refuse. Caligula even imposed a formal tax of sexual service. Wealthy families were required to provide their women for scheduled periods in the palace, the length of time determined by wealth. It was not prostitution, but enforced slavery, a ritualized humiliation of the upper class. Those who resisted met horrific fates. Some women were forced into public acts during gladiatorial games. Others stripped of rank and sold to brothels to serve soldiers and slaves. The message was unmistakable. No one, no matter their heritage, escaped the emperor's reach. The suffering inflicted upon these women was enduring and immeasurable. Raised under Rome's rigid codes of virtue and duty, they were taught that purity defined their worth and family honor. Being reduced to objects for Caligula's cruelty shattered their identities. Many endured acts that violated not only their dignity, but also their deepest spiritual convictions. The conflict between their upbringing and their forced degradation often drove them into total psychological collapse. The psychological destruction inflicted on these families was often beyond repair. Marriages collapsed, children were scarred, and noble Roman bloodlines were reduced to tools of the emperor's depravity. Caligula took particular pleasure in forcing senators to watch as their wives were violated. He arranged special seating so that husbands had perfect views of their wives being coerced into acts of oral sex or intercourse with the emperor or his chosen partners. The men's faces, a mix of fury, shame, and helplessness, seemed to give Caligula as much satisfaction as the acts themselves. The imperial palace on the Palatine Hill underwent architectural changes to suit Caligula's ever-growing sexual obsessions. He ordered the creation of special chambers for group acts, complete with elaborate staging and observation spaces. Surviving fragments suggest rooms where ordinary furniture was replaced with couches set in circles, allowing every movement to be visible from multiple points. One chamber, according to surviving accounts, resembled a miniature amphitheater with tiered seating overlooking a central space where Caligula staged sexual performances. He compelled captive slaves and even Roman citizens to perform sexual acts as senators, and their families were forced to watch and applaud. The emperor's bedchamber itself became a place of terror. Unlike previous rulers' private rooms, Caligula's chamber contained viewing sections and several entrances, allowing him to summon audiences to witness his encounters. He seemed to draw equal pleasure from being watched as from the acts themselves, treating sex as a spectacle of his total dominion. Caligula even created what could only be called a palace brothel, staffed by the wives and daughters of disgraced senators. These women were forced to serve not only the emperor but also his guests, foreign envoys, and sometimes even common soldiers, as instruments of ultimate humiliation. Caligula frequently directed these scenes himself, offering commentary like a stage director orchestrating a performance. Most shocking of all was how he merged sexual degradation with Rome's most sacred political and religious institutions. Ceremonies once performed with reverent dignity were transformed into obscene displays. During formal Senate meetings, Caligula occasionally demanded that senators' wives perform sexual services as their husbands debated laws. The sacred act of governance became indistinguishable from sexual corruption, with the empire's greatest political decisions made as powerful men watched their families degraded before them. Religious rituals also suffered defilement. Caligula declared himself a living god and ordered that sacred rites include sexual acts performed in his honor. Virgin priestesses sworn to chastity were forced into public intercourse as part of worship, while festivals once rooted in devotion turned into frenzied orgies involving unwilling members of noble families. His marriage ceremonies became equally infamous. Caligula married and divorced repeatedly, sometimes within mere days, using each union as a tool of humiliation against the bride's relatives. One report describes him forcing a bride's father to watch as he consummated the marriage before the assembled guests, treating what should have been sacred as an act of conquest. Yet Caligula's desires extended beyond pleasure. They evolved into a weapon of economic control against Rome's elite. He targeted the most beautiful wives and daughters of the wealthy, demanding access to them in exchange for their family's safety and fortune. This created a grotesque marketplace where nobles bartered their female kin for political favor or simple survival. Families received invitations for their women to attend private imperial audiences, fully aware of what awaited them but powerless to refuse without forfeiting everything. The emperor even formalized this oppression through a sexual taxation system. Wealthy households were required to offer their women for specified terms of service within the palace, the length and frequency dictated by their wealth. This was not prostitution in any ordinary sense. It was sexual enslavement imposed upon the empire's upper class as proof of Caligula's total authority. Women who resisted met horrific punishment. Some were forced into public sexual acts for the amusement of crowds during gladiatorial games. Others were sold into real prostitution, stripped of their status, and made to serve soldiers and slaves. The message was absolute. No one, regardless of rank, was beyond the emperor's reach. The toll on the women compelled to take part in Caligula's sexual theater was profound and enduring. They had been raised in rigid Roman virtue, taught that chastity and honor were their highest duties to family and empire. Now, reduced to instruments of the emperor's amusement, they suffered psychological wounds that far outlasted physical abuse. Many were forced into acts that violated not only their dignity, but their deepest spiritual beliefs. The unbearable conflict between their moral upbringing and enforced degradation often resulted in complete mental collapse.